everybody.
Hi.
It's very early here in New Mexico in the States. Um, I'm awake though, I promise. And I'm excited to be here to share about what we found during our WikiTree Challenge Week for the Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire Family History Society. It was a great week. We had a lot of fun. We got a lot done, and we're excited to share. So I'm just going to go and introduce real quick here. From WikiTree, we have Hillary Gadsby and Joe Fitzhenry. They were both participants during the challenge week. And Joe is actually going to be our team captain for next week. So she's here just checking it out to see how not painful it is at all. It's really not, I promise. And so then we have David, who's the chair of the society. And we have Karen, who's the publicity person for them, and she's the one who brought us all together. And then Muriel is their secretary. So we're excited to have all three of you here for this. I am going to play a really quick little video just for people who don't know about WikiTree is. We just got it and we're excited to share it. It's short, don't worry. And hopefully this works.
Researched your family history? Preserve it. Collaborate with your cousins to grow it. Connect it with research from over 1 million other family history enthusiasts from around the world. For free. Welcome to WikiTree, a volunteer-based, mission-driven community dedicated to growing an accurate, single-family tree. A tree that we all share. Close cousins on WikiTree privately collaborate on profiles of living family members and the recently deceased. Collaboration on deep ancestors is between genealogists who are meticulous about research and cite their sources like historians. Genetic genealogists on WikiTree carefully compare DNA to further increase accuracy. All our efforts come together as one on WikiTree to be preserved and enjoyed by cousins and descendants long after we are gone. Our community is special because we've grown from the grassroots up instead of top down in a big corporation. This has made our community uniquely productive and enjoyable. We're creating something wonderful and having fun at the same time. Come join us at wikitree.com.
So that's just a little bit about WikiTree. Would one of you like to tell us a little bit about your society?
Okay, well, shall I do that? So Cambridgeshire Family History Society was formed in 1976, and in 2020 we merged with the Huntingdonshire Family History Society. And if you're not familiar with the local geography, it's the adjacent former county. In 1974, English local government was reorganised, and what was the old county of Huntingdonshire then became part of Cambridgeshire, and quite a lot of the organisations within that area now cover the enlarged area, including such important family and genealogical sources as libraries and archives services. We have about 1,300 members across the world. Some live in Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire, like Muriel and myself. Others live elsewhere, like Karen, and some of them live in overseas countries such as Finland, the United States and Australia, and so on and so forth. We have an active committee of about 12 people who meet every couple of months, and we have a series of regular talks by Zoom and in person. We have research surgeries which take place in half a dozen venues across the patch, mostly on a monthly basis. And we have a range of other activities. So we are fairly typical of family history societies, I guess, across the UK. We've recently launched a new website And one of the things that we are particularly pleased with is the way that people can then search for ancestors in our databases, and they can also, of course, then buy downloads of the records that they want and various other things. We publish a journal once every 3 months. Some people elect to have it as a print journal, others choose to have it electronically. And then Karen produces a newsletter once a month, which goes out to all the members who've chosen to take that, which I think is about 75 or 80%.
Wow.
That's a quick overview. If Karen or Muriel would like to add something, well, you're welcome to do so.
No, other
Wonderful.
than we also have quite a thriving Facebook page as well, which we have also set up a lot of individual groups for various parishes within Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire, with the aim for people to join them and share their research, their brick walls, their photos, anything they want to share that's about family history in that area, and hopefully meet up with other people who are searching in the same area and hopefully the same names, so that they can start to collaborate together.
That's
just to add to that, actually, Karen and I are working on a knowledge audit at the moment, which will then allow us to sort of direct people more clearly to potential people that they can link with and help.
Oh, great.
So plenty of things happening there as well. So
that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. I've done it before in my career, so that
oh, nice.
It works quite well. So
very cool. Well, we're happy to have you with us. We loved the 7 people that you gave us to start with. Well, you gave us 12, but the 7 that we picked to start with, in their own right, they were all super interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about how you picked them?
Well, I picked them all, and the criteria, I think they all ended up being baptised in Cambridgeshire or Huntingdonshire, but that wasn't what I actually was trying to do. Obviously, I wanted them all to have a link to Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire.
Yeah.
And I tried to pick men and women, different eras, so that you were looking at different types of records, and across the 2 counties. And I did know that I made it difficult for you. I knew you were going to find it more difficult with the Huntingdonshire records because they're not really online. So you had to be quite creative with finding some of those things. And anything that I found that was interesting in any of our other records as well. So it wasn't just looking at a census return or a parish register. It was looking at some of the more unusual records. Wills came into it a lot, I think.
Yep.
Marriage licenses, non-conformists. So yeah, I really wanted to give you a run for your money and a good trawl through all the records that are available.
Well, it was fun. I know they had a good time. I know there were a couple that were really challenging that we'll look at, but they, we love a challenge, so we're happy.
It's called the challenge, so I thought I would.
So. That's right. Well, let's get into the stuff then. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here were the 7 people that we started with. This number underneath them was their CC7 number at the end of the challenge. And what that is we call it the connection count. And that is how many people in the tree they're connected to. So when we started, some of them, we'd only added their parents, so their connection count was maybe 3. Mm-hmm. A couple of these did have some things on WikiTree already. But those numbers there are the numbers of people that we were able to add or connect them with. So we'll go more into that for each one, but that's just sort of a little overview there. This is an example of what we mean when we talk about our connection finder. So we have 2 features on WikiTree. One is called the relationship finder, and you can put in the WikiTree IDs for two people, and it will tell you if they have a blood relationship, and it will show you what that is and who their current ancestor or who their ancestor is. And then we have our connection finder, where you can also put in two WikiTree IDs, and it will show you the connection between those two people, but it will include blood and marriage relationships. So this is an example. Joan Whitaker was our team captain for the week, and Roger Jennings was one of our 7 starting people. And so she is 22 degrees away from Roger. And every time you see a color change is a marriage. So there are a few marriages between the two of them, but this is what we're talking about when we talk about degrees and connection finders and things like that. So we took a look with the 7 starting, and we wanted to see who out of the 7 of them were the closest to each other. And these were the 3. So Roger Jennings, he already had some stuff on WikiTree, and we were able to add a lot to him, so it wasn't surprising that he was one of the closest connected. So Roger Jennings and Winifred Fair, they were 16 degrees apart. And then Roger Jennings and Miles Day were 17 degrees apart. And Winifred and Charles Stacy were 18 degrees apart. So those were the closest connections between the 7 starting people. Mm-hmm. And then one of the ones that popped out to me when I was looking at it was Marjorie Stephenson. You know, most of them had varying degrees from the other 7, like anything from 16 to 25. But Marjorie was 24 degrees from Joanna and Winifred and Miles and Charles. And with Joanna and Winifred, she was connected through her brother's wife. And then with Miles and Charles, she connected through Marjorie's mother. So it was just kind of fun to see, you know, she had all those connections within the 24 degrees.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And then, so every week we do, we call it, you know, it's our connection finder. It's featured profiles that we show. And we usually have a theme, like artists or something like that. And when it's a challenge week, we include all of the 7 starting people from the challenge. So this week, you can see on the right here, we tried to find notables from Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire, and our main person that was kind of the anchor for the week was Oliver Cromwell. So this shows the relationship or the connection between Roger Jennings and Oliver Cromwell. He was the closest out of the 7 starting people to Oliver. And you can see there's only one marriage in their connection path. So Roger's second great-grandfather, Joseph Pike, married Oliver's first cousin 5 times removed, Lucy. And that's how Roger and Oliver are connected. Mm-hmm. So it's just a lot of different ways that you can look at relationships and connections and, you know, see who's in their connection trail.
Cool.
Can I ask a question there?
Uh-huh.
You're talking about sort of degrees here. Does that link in with the concept of I think it's Kevin Bacon, 7 degrees of separation?
Yep, it's pretty much exactly the same concept. It's how many people are between you and another person.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily follow that they're actually related, does it? It's about the way in which they're linked. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the relationship. The relationship finder shows the blood relations.
Yes.
And then the connection finder will include blood and marriage.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. So, I wanted to start with William Wade Ellis. We're going to share a little bit about each of the 7, and I did them in the order of the ones that were hardest for us to find to the ones where we could find the most. So William Wade Ellis was definitely a bit of a challenge. A little about him, for those who aren't aware, he was born June 11th, 1751 in Ely, Cambridgeshire, England, to Thomas Ellis and Elizabeth Robbins. He was an artist and a naturalist. He also traveled with Captain James Cook on all 3 of his voyages as a surgeon's mate, and he would paint different things that he saw. Birds were really popular. for him to paint and other kind of nature creatures. He was described as a genteel young fellow of good education. In 1785, he went to join the Queen Charlotte on a voyage to Northwest America, but in Belgium, he accidentally fell off the mast of the ship and he died. So that was his last voyage. So one of our members, Greg Clark, he made these fantastic graphics that you're going to see throughout here. So you can get an idea of where we started and where we ended up. So when we started with William, we had his parents. And then we were able to add just a little bit on his dad's side as far as direct ancestors go. So we got back to a great-grandfather there. And then this is when we're talking about the CC7 and the 7 degrees out. This graphic will show you the first circle that we start with. So here's William, and then the green dots are his siblings, and the black dots, the gray dots are his parents. So that's where we started as far as degrees for him. We only had the 1 degree. When we finished, we were able to add a little bit to 7 degrees out, so you can see we added a couple more siblings, and then we were able to branch out to 7 degrees. We added 15 at 7 degrees out. So we were able to add 67 connections to William within those 7 degrees. He was definitely a tough one. So who was William Ellis? This was William Wade Ellis's great-grandfather. He was born about February 1630 in Sheffield, Yorkshire, England. He, like I said, is William Wade Ellis's great-grandfather. In 1684, he was the master cutler of Sheffield, which made him very influential in the area and elsewhere. Sheffield was the main center of cutlery production outside of London at the time. They were especially known for edge tools, knives, razors, axes, and nails. And then later, they gained worldwide recognition for things like the Bowie knife, which were mass-produced and shipped to the U.S. and are really popular still today. So William, the great-grandfather, would have been at the center of all of that as the master cutler. And then his son, William, who would be William Wade Ellis's grandfather, he was also a cutler. He followed in his father's footsteps, and he was a parish clerk, and he could read and write. And then another son of William's, Seth, became a reverend in that same area. And then this is another graphic. On WikiTree, we have something called WikiTree Plus, which you can run all kinds of reports and look at things in a lot of different ways. And it can generate maps like this that you can look at immigration patterns. So the maps show the location of everyone who's within the CC7 of the starting person. Each of those people has a red dot for where they were born and a blue dot for where they died. And then there's a pink line that joins the 2 dots. That's their immigration pattern. So you can, it's another way to kind of look at that. So not too much for William because he was definitely our toughest one. And then for fun, since he sailed with James Cook, I just wanted to share the connection between those two. And you can see they are 31 degrees apart. Mm-hmm. And they had a couple interesting characters in there. That Minchin family, they had some interesting stories too. So that was William. You guys have any comments or questions on him?
I think you did well with him.
Yeah,
it was difficult.
They really tried. They really tried with him. And they had fun doing it. There was a lot of the chatter was about, the Ellis family and trying to see what they could find. Joe, did you work on that one, or Hillary?
I didn't. No, I mainly worked on the Jennings family. Yeah,
and I mainly worked on the family of possibly. Not. I didn't really work. I don't think I did anything on it. Mm-hmm.
Oh, tell a lie. Were these the one that we finally connected through the peaches? Because I did a fair bit of work on the peaches for one of the ones that we couldn't connect up to the
Yeah.
big tree.
Yeah.
Okay. In which case, yes, I did, but only because I was working on the peaches, at the end of the week.
Yeah, you can actually see that in this connection. So there's William to start, and then Thomas, his brother, and then he married Elizabeth Peaches, so that's where the Peaches tied in.
And that's the evidence that demonstrates the move from Yorkshire to Ely, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Because the family moved from Yorkshire to Ely, didn't it? In the evidence you've got there. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
So that was William.
It's interesting. They all stayed in England as well, apart from William Wade Ellis dying where he did.
Yeah, in Belgium. Yeah,
I expect some of them are going to go all over the world.
Oh yeah, just wait until you see some of these. Some of them, it's like, whoa. All right, so that was William. Then our next one that was also a little bit of a struggle was Joanna Vasa. A little about her. She was born April 11th, 1795 in Soham, Cambridgeshire, England. The daughter, and I'm going to say this wrong, I'm sure, the daughter of Oloda Aquano and Susanna Cullen. She was the only surviving child of Oloda, and Oloda was a former slave and an anti-slavery campaigner. There's not much that's known about the life of Joanna. She did marry a Henry Bromley in 1821, and she died March 10th in 1857 in London. So here's what we started with. We had her parents and one of her grandparents. And then here's what we ended up with. So not a ton more with the direct ancestors, but we did add a grandma and some great-grandparents on her mother's side. And then as far as the connection circles, we started with a little bit more for her than for William. There were about 70 connections for her already. And then we finished that. So we added about 300, and she ended with 359 connections. Mm-hmm. So that shows you out to 7 degrees, we were able to add quite a few. Not in her direct ancestral path, but certainly connected to her. So I tried to find some interesting people in for each of them to share. Williams Hollows Blackman. He was in a little outside of her 7 circles. He's actually 9 degrees out. But her first cousin, Joanna's first cousin, John Fitches, married William's second cousin, Matilda. So that's how they're connected. Mm-hmm. And William was born August 26th, 1796 in Saffron Weldon, Essex, England, to Robert Blackman and Anne Wakefield. He died December 13th, 1895 in San Diego, California, and his obituary was titled The Oldest Inhabitant. And I think it was Vicky Blanco, one of our participants, she found this obituary, which I just wanted to share because it's nice, but it's also ironic if you haven't figured out why yet. Oh, I messed up on that slide, so you won't even know. But I'll tell you. The mortal remains of William Blackman were placed in their last resting place in Oak Mound Cemetery today. Hundreds attended the funeral of the centenarian. 6 Healdsburg pioneers, all of whom were 70 years of age, acted as pallbearers, while crowded around the grave of the good old man were many men and women who are looking at life from its west window. The oldest person present at the funeral ceremonies was Mrs. L. Toombs, Grandma Toombs as she is called, who is 92 years of age. Now that Mr. Blackman is gone, Mrs. Toombs is the oldest person in the county and feels keenly the loss of her friend. In many respects, William Blackman was a remarkable man. There have been many fake centenarians, but the men who live to celebrate their 100th anniversary are few in number. Fewer still reach that age with health and faculties unimpaired, and yet on the 25th of last August, when Mr. Blackman had reached the century milestone, he entertained a jolly crowd of old folk and was as happy and bright as the youngest person present. It was on that occasion that Mr. Blackman and others decided to organize an old folks club, whose members were to be over 70 years of age, and whose object should be to care for those who needed assistance. The good old man was the first of 30 members to be stricken from the roll by the hand of death, and in his passing, the city lost a most worthy citizen. So, nice tribute to him. But and don't look at the slide because I messed up the number, but he actually died in 1895. He died in December of 1895. So he actually wasn't 100 years old. He was like shy of it by about 8 months. So ironic, especially with the obituary, that talks about the Finks centenarians. But I suppose it can happen.
How do you, looking at the date there, 1796, most records would give a baptismal date, not necessarily a birth date. I can understand you got a birth date from the newspaper report, but the baptismal date, which you probably can find in the records, maybe sometime after the birth date, mightn't it? So, if he was baptized at about a year of age, he might well have been 100 years old.
Yeah, it could have been. And then my grandma, our entire life that I knew her, we thought she was born in 1925. We celebrated her birthday like that. And then she was probably in her 90s when I found her birth certificate of her twin, who was born in 1924.
Okay,
and so we were like, Grandma, your mom had a really long pregnancy, and she still somehow, she got confused about her life, and she was a year off her whole life. So it can certainly happen.
Oh dear.
Good, yeah. Interesting.
So here was the map for Joanna.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of her family, you can see, traveled down to Australia. A lot of her connections ended up down in Australia and New Zealand. In particular, Melbourne and Tasmania. When you go into WikiTree Plus and look at these maps, you can actually zoom in to certain areas to really see. So there's her for New Zealand and Australia.
Mm.
So quite a few went down there. Any thoughts or comments on her before we go to the next one?
Definitely. I saw that some went to India as well, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, several of these had some that went to and from India.
Yeah.
Which was kind of cool.
I think the English or the British were all over India at the time. They might well have been working for the East India Company.
Yeah, could have been, yeah.
That would make sense.
So would the work that you've done involve looking at the East India Company records?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
There are some on Find My Past.
Yes.
And FIBIS, the Families in British India Society. So
yes, that's good.
Probably would have been looked at. Again, it's not one that I worked on this particular profile.
No, that's interesting. Thank you.
All right. Next up is Marjorie Stephenson. So Marjorie was born January 24th, 1885 in Burrell, Cambridgeshire, England, to Robert Stephenson and Sarah Rogers. She was a lecturer in domestic science and went on to be a biochemist. She was one of the first 2 women elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, which is an award for individuals who made a substantial contribution to the improvement of natural knowledge with mathematics, medical science, things like that. So she was one of the first 2 women elected for that award. So here's where we started with Marjorie. We had her parents, and then we finished. We were able to add a little bit more for her than the first 2. So we got a few grandparents on her mother's side, and then back a few more generations you can see on her father's side.
Mm-hmm.
As far as her 7 degrees, we started with her parents and 4 of her siblings. It's her first circle right there. So she had 6 connections, and we were able to get her to 577 connections in those 7 degrees. So, and every time you see a gray square or a gray circle, that's a direct ancestor of hers that we were able to add.
Yeah.
So. So one of the interesting people in her line, it was actually her uncle, Charles Henry Rogers. He was born in 1852 in Newmarket in Suffolk, Samuel Rogers and Alice Ann Lawrence. He married Mary Ethel Absalom in 1895 in Essex, and then he was a vicar at St. Albans Church in Westcliff-on-Sea, which is also in Essex. The cool thing there is a stained glass window that was given to the church in his memory by friends in the congregation, which we should be able to look at here. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Can't make it any bigger, but they said that Henry is the one depicted kneeling at the bottom right. So down there praying. He's down there praying. So beautiful window. So if you're anywhere near Essex, go check out the St. Albans Church. And you can see that window there.
I am in Essex.
Oh, no, now you have to go.
I'll have to go now.
You have to go and tell us how it was.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we thought that was really cool. That was her uncle.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting about the importance of stained glass windows in family history research. And I mean, I both have a personal interest in this and have written something about it, and not least because the National Stained Glass Museum in England is in Ely, where Muriel and I live. But I think it's a very underused resource in family history terms. I mean, have any of you ever come across any sort of detailed sources that have a discussion of this?
No, I haven't. Honestly, it's not even something that I had thought about until I started looking at Charles and realized, that there's, the potential.
Well, my grandfather had a stained glass window in his memory, and his grandfather did too. And
oh, wow.
So although quite a number of them were destroyed in the war and so on,
oh, no.
When the churches were bombed. So yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? And
yeah,
Westcliff-on-Sea is a nice area, isn't it? Quite near Southend, isn't it? So yeah, it's worth visiting.
Yeah, you definitely have to keep an open mind about what all can help with genealogy.
Definitely, yeah.
It's surprising what things can, or what you can overlook or just miss if you just aren't thinking.
Actually, newspapers are a very good source for dedication of stained glass windows. It makes an interesting story, and very often you get a picture as well, don't you?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So there was Charles, and then so the interesting thing we found with Marjorie was that a lot of her family had connections with horses. So her maternal grandfather, Samuel Rogers, was a horse trainer and a jockey. During his career, he won the 1,000 Guineas, which I believe is like the Kentucky Derby for us in the States. He won that twice in his career, once on a horse named Firebrand in 1842, and then on a horse named Habena in 1855. I did read one article about him where his style was described as not being shy with the whip. So really gung-ho jockey. And then on her paternal side, her grandfather, Robert Stevenson, and his brother, Thomas Stevenson, were racehorse breeders and trainers. And then Matthew, her great-great-grandfather, was a training groom. I believe one of his sons was also a training groom. But he was a training groom for the Duke of Bedford at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just interesting to see, on both sides of her family, she had connections with horses. So
yeah.
I mean, that's interesting, actually, because the National Horse Racing Museum is at Newmarket, which is just over the borders from Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire, and they do have extensive records there. It's well worth visiting if you haven't.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's good.
So you can see here, a lot of people were spread around there in England, and then a couple came to America, to the States. And again, she had some that went down there to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And do we know if they went voluntarily or whether they were sent?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I didn't look at her Australia lines, but it looks like they ended up down in the Melbourne and Tasmania area too. Down around there. Definitely something to look at.
Various degrees of being sent as well, aren't there? One is sort of compulsory, one you kind of opt into, like joining the Navy or something like that.
Yep, exactly.
And some you make a completely free choice, and some, it's done for you because it's the sentence.
So true. So that was Marjorie.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the bit that we were able to find her. Next, and then this is the zoomed in for her for England. So,
so quite a lot of movement there then.
Mm-hmm, they moved a lot around there, and then you can see there's a few who strayed out to Austria and Berlin, and
that's good.
Yeah.
So that's her. So up next is Miles Geoffrey Game Day. He was born December 1st, 1896 in St. Ives, Huntingdonshire, England, to George Dennis Day and Margaret Jane Davies. He was a World War I flying ace credited with 5 aerial victories. He was also a war poet, and most of his poems were published post-war. When the war broke out, he joined the Royal Naval Air Service and served as flight commander. A lot of his poetry was inspired by the death of his brother Dennis, who'd been shot and killed by a sniper in 1915. And then Miles himself died while in service on February 27th, 1918, when he was shot down in flames into the sea about 25 miles west of Dunkirk by a German seaplane. So I feel for his mom and dad, because rough time.
Yeah.
A lot of parents. So here's where we started with Miles. We had just a bit on his mother's side, and here's where we wound up. So we were able to add a few generations back on his mother's side, and then go several generations on his father's side, and then a fair amount there in the middle. This is where we started with him and his 7 degrees. So we had his parents and 3 of his siblings, and then just a smattering of 26 people there. And with him, we were able to get to 709 connections. So quite a few there for Miles. George Game Day. So George is Miles' grandfather on his dad's side. He was born December 14th, 1795 in St. Ives, Huntingdonshire, to Jonas Day and Francis Game, which is where the game came from. And I kind of chuckle every time I say his name because it's Game Day, which makes me think of football. Either football, American or soccer, they're both good. George was a prominent farmer around the same time that the Irish potato famine was ravaging Ireland. The famine was one of the contributing factors to Britain imposing high tariffs on food exports, and a movement began in the late 1840s against those laws, and it caused a lot of debate between proponents of free trade and protectionists. George was a noted protectionist. He made at least one published speech on the issue, and was considered to be one of the leaders of that movement in that area at that time. So that was the great-grandfather on his dad's side. And then we looked at David Davis, who was the great-grandfather on his mother's side. He was born about 1797. Hillary, do you want to say that?
Let's see if I can pronounce it properly. Llandusand, I think it is. My Welsh pronunciation's not brilliant, even though I've lived in Wales for 3 years, or 30 years, I mean. It's
I lived in Wales once, and I think that's a pretty good effort to hit it.
yeah, yeah. Merthyr Tydfil is easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I could have gotten that one.
Yeah.
But he started off as a grocer and a draper. He was working as an apprentice with one of his uncles. And then he went on to be a founder of the steam coal industry in South Wales. He got involved in small-scale mining in Rygos, and then he moved from Hirwaun to a house he built in Blaengar. He built another house there for his son David, who joined him in the business. And then another one of his sons became the sales agent, but he lived in Cardiff. And so many of his workmen followed him as well. And eventually 4 of his sons became involved, and David established Davis and Sons. So what I thought was cool here was that both of his great-grandfathers were pretty influential, in their different areas. He had the one that was the protectionist, and then this David, who was the, kind of one of the founders for the steam coal trade in the area.
Yeah, I managed to find some things in the Welsh newspapers for this line, I think, and help the person who was researching it, who was an Australian, was researching somebody in Wales. But I managed to find some stuff in the Welsh newspapers, which, considering the Davis surname, I think it was very good.
Yeah, I think David Davis was the one where we saw somewhere that he had 10 kids. And I think it was Gillian. I know several people worked on this, but they were able to actually find all 10 children. And there was a lot of discussion in our Discord channel because they had to just tap into a lot of different records to try and find them. Because some of them were just living in different places at different times. And but they were able to piece it together, and they got all 10. So all 10 of them were there. And then just for interesting sake, since Miles was an aerial and he was shot down by a German warplane, I thought it would be interesting to see how far he was from the flying ace Manfred von Richthofen. So they're 21 degrees apart.
Wow.
So, and you can kind of see those Nassaus they have in there that are connecting them. So some bigger names there in their connection path, which is always interesting. And then here's his map. Miles had the highest percentage of people who stayed at home and the fewest who went overseas. So a couple down to Australia. Looks like one died down there in New Zealand. But mostly they stayed. Looks like he had some also in the India area. But most of them stayed pretty close. So that's Miles. Any thoughts on him before we go to the next one?
I noticed I was doing in the end I had to just put some stuff on his, on one side because it was all in records that really only we held.
Yes.
And just generation after generation after generation, they didn't even move out of the town that they were in. They were just staying right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm surprised to see how much movement there is really. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So Charles Stacey was the next one up. He was born January 22nd, 1843 in Erith, Huntingdonshire, to John Stacey and Elizabeth Leedon. Charles was a U.S. Army soldier who received a Medal of Honor after fighting in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. He voluntarily took a position on the skirmish line to help find snipers that were attacking the Union artillery. And even after they pulled back, their own people from that line, he still stayed there, trying to defend and find those snipers. And he was actually taken captive and then held as a prisoner of war. So that was Mr. Stacey. So with him, we also started with just his parents. And then we were able to add all of his grandparents and some great-grandparents and even a couple great-great-grandparents for him in his direct lines. As far as the degrees of connection, we started with a spouse, a child, and his parents. So you had 4, a CC7 of 4, and we finished with a CC7 of 1,467.
Wow.
So we were able to branch out quite a bit for him, as you can see there. So that was fun. This was one of the ones I found. He's a little outside the 7 degrees too. He was 9 degrees, but he's connected through Charles's sister's husband and Daniel's mother's husband. Their families married. But Daniel also served in the Civil War. He was born January 30th, 1827 in Riga, Monroe, New York, to Thomas Bingham and Almira Galusha. He served in the Civil War. He enlisted November 20th, 1861, and was a lieutenant colonel. He was commissioned into the Field and Staff New York 64th Infantry. He became a colonel in 1862, and then he was actually wounded twice. He was wounded once on May 3rd, 1863 at Chancellorsville, Virginia, and then a little bit later on July 2nd at Gettysburg. And he was discharged February 10th, 1864, but he died just a few months later in July of that year. So I don't know for sure, but I wondered if it was just war, injuries from the battles that he never quite healed from.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't have a lot of time to recover from May to July.
No, right? Yeah, so it was bad.
Yes. Interesting to see the early photograph of him there. Does any of your sort of mapping tools indicate where you've found photographs of the people that you've identified?
Those would be on the profile. When we add a profile, we ask members to source where they found it from. So I'd have to go look at his profile, but yeah, you'd be able to find it there. Yeah.
And that's one of my personal interests is early photographs. So yeah, it's good. Yeah,
you'd be able to see there where they found it. Yeah, you guys are gonna have to come into WikiTree and just explore. Because this just in an hour we can barely share.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yes.
So, but there's all kinds of good stuff waiting for you guys out there.
Yeah.
So that was Daniel, and then just again for my own entertainment and hopefully yours. General George Meade was actually the Union general who defeated General Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg. So I thought it would be interesting to see how Charles was ever related or connected to General Meade. And they're just 15 degrees apart. And you can see Charles's sister, she married a Lytton, and then George married, and his family married into the Meigs, and that's where they were connected. So quite cool. And then here's his map.
Yeah.
So they went all over the states. States in England. I'm guessing the blue dots in the middle are probably people who died at sea during the war, I guess. Looks like he had one who died in Spain, and then a few down there in Australia and New Zealand. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I thought you'd like this one because I knew that he went over to the States. So I thought I'll put him in.
Yeah. Yep, some of our U.S. people are very excited to have a U.S. person to work on.
I know when you were introducing it, you said, and if you're wondering why he's here, it's because he was born in Erith in Huntingdonshire.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So that was Charles. So then this one was my favorite, Winifred Harrison Fair, and it's because I love airplanes, and she was a pilot. She was born January 9th, 1906 in St. Neots, Huntingdonshire, to Ernest Henry Harrison and Winifred Edith Kate Stevens. She was an aviator and the first woman to be checked out on a hurricane fighter, and she was one of the first 8 the initial group of women pilots to join the Air Transport Auxiliary. And so in that picture right there, I don't know if you can really tell, but she's climbed out of a Spitfire, which is one of my favorite airplanes. So she got to fly Spitfire. So I thought she was pretty dang awesome. So with her, we started with her parents, and we were able to add a lot.
Oh, wow.
So this is a 10 generation chart.
Yeah.
That is, yeah.
This was the one I worked on. I did quite a bit on this one, I think.
Yeah.
We did well, yeah. That's good.
So that was very good. And then this is where we started with her 7 degrees of connections. She had 80, so she started with the CC7 of 80, and we ended with a CC7 of 1,532 for her. So, Hillary, your interesting find, was it connected to her?
Yes, it was an interesting divorce. There was one of the people divorced his wife. His wife went on to marry the co-respondent, or one of the co-respondents, and then I found another divorce from that second husband, and because she, for the same sort of reason, so there was a co-respondence. He was divorcing her again. So yeah,
God.
and I also found people that were one. There was a Martin. There was a family where there were 2 Martins, a father and son, and the father had a second wife, and the second wife was the aunt of the son's wife. So it was sort of quite closely connected to each other. So we certainly had on our interesting finds. I managed to find a few things.
Interesting dynamics, for sure. One fun fact about Winifred's dad, Ernest, he delivered the first British quadruplets to all survive to adulthood, even though they were born 7 weeks prematurely. And he had some specialist nurses who helped him, but he took care of them for their first few critical weeks at his own home. And as of 2021, they were all still alive.
Wow.
Oh, that's interesting.
Interestingly, we were mentioning about stained glass earlier. In this line, there is one of them. His he was I think he had something to do with wood cabinet maker. I think he was, and he presented a lectern to the church where he was baptized, which was his father's church. And there was a nice bit in the newspaper about it, which I've actually transcribed and put on a page that's been transcribed. So,
oh, wonderful!
Oh,
yeah,
look at that.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Could I ask you a question, Hilary? I'm very impressed with the number of direct ancestors that you found of Winifred there in the slide that we saw earlier. I mean, roughly how long did it take you to come up with all that lot?
It wasn't just me working on it. I worked on some of them, and I worked on and adding all the family as well. All the siblings and things. Because once you add the siblings, you can start building out a bit.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So do you have any sense of the time that you and your colleagues would have spent to get to that stage? Because it's always good to see that, isn't it?
Usually, it can take quite a while to add on the thing.
I know, that's why I asked. Yes.
Yeah.
Probably some of those more distant generations. A lot of that probably was already on WikiTree.
Yeah, because you're connecting to what's already on there as well, aren't you? Yeah.
A lot of them we would have found and added, and then there's some where they would have been able to connect to stuff that's already.
Yeah,
I can see that. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a couple interesting connections to Winifred. Frederick Albert Cook. Winifred's husband's sister married Frederick's nephew. He was, I think, 5 degrees from Winifred. He was born June 10th, 1865 in Hortonville, Delaware, Sullivan, New York, to Magdalena Long. He graduated from Columbia University and did medical studies at New York University Medical School and got his doctorate in 1890. He was an explorer both of the Arctic and the Antarctic. he served as surgeon on Robert Peary's Arctic expedition of 1891 to 1892, and then on the Belgian Antarctic expedition of 1897 to 1899. Later, he was convicted of fraud and served time at Leavenworth Penitentiary from 1923 to 1930, and then eventually he was pardoned by President Franklin Roosevelt.
Wow.
So his life kind of took a turn there.
He's a colourful character.
Hopefully he got it back together after, learned some lessons there.
Well, quite a lot of medics and solicitors and that in that line.
Yeah, there were quite a few. Mm-hmm. And then we had William Thornton Carter II. William was born September 14th, 1900 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to William Ernest Carter and Lucille Stewart Polk. He and his parents and one of his sisters were actually survivors of the Titanic sinking. And it was it's a sad little story, but I'm going to read it anyway and try not to cry, because if it has anything to do with dogs, it makes me cry, so I'm going to try not to. But this was just what was found when they were researching him. We actually have a Titanic project on WikiTree, so they'd already done quite a bit of research on this particular profile, but it said William just managed to join his mother and sister in Lifeboat 4, but it was a close thing. After reluctantly allowing 13-year-old John Ryerson into the boat, Chief Second Steward George Dodge had demanded no more boys. But Mrs. Carter put a hat on young William's head, and together they boarded the boat. Carter, in his later years, never liked to discuss the Titanic disaster, not because of the loss of life or the experience of it all, but rather as an 11-year-old boy, Carter never forgot the memory of having to leave behind his old Airedale behind on a leash. Light Toller would not permit the dog to get on the lifeboat and with the rest of the family. So young Carter cried, but he was assured by Colonel John Jacob Astor that he would take care of the dog, and the last thing that young Carter saw of his beloved Airedale was John Jacob Astor holding the dog's leash. And apparently there's a rumor that John Jacob Astor went down to the ship's kennels to release the dogs that were there, and this story kind of lends a little credence to that rumor. So William had to leave his dog. That would be quite impressionable on a 12-year-old.
Yeah,
I would imagine. Yeah. So Winifred's husband's brother married William's wife, Cinta, after their divorce. So that's how they were connected. And then just because Amelia Earhart's a personal favorite of mine, woman pilot, I wanted to see how they were connected. And there's, actually it's pretty cool. So, this relative of Winifred's married David Culbertson, and this relative of Amelia Earhart married Agnes Culbertson. So they had relatives that married siblings.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went everywhere. They were all over the place. So, lots down here. Well, not lots, but you can see, in the India area. Some down there to Australia, but a lot back and forth between the States and Canada and England. Any thoughts on Winifred before we move on?
I think it would be so cool if she had known who she was connected to, don't you?
I know, yeah, it would be super cool. That's why we have so much fun now looking at that stuff, right? Like,
yeah, definitely, yeah.
That's why the relationship finder and the connection finder are members to their favorite tools, because it's always like, am I related to so and so? Am I connected to so and so?
Yeah.
And the air connection is good because, of course, you've got the Duxford, the Imperial War Museum, Air Museum, which is in Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire.
Oh, nice.
So it's quite nice as well there. So there's some good links there.
Very
You
cool.
go see the Spitfires flying there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, it's great.
So cool. Love it. All right, so number 7. What do you say his middle name? Some? Sorry.
I think
So.
so.
So So Roger Soame Jennings, he went by Soame mostly in his life, but he was born April 24th, 1904 in Bottisham, Cambridgeshire, to Roger William Bulwer Jennings and Winifred Pike Peace. He was a British art historian known as an expert on East Asian ceramics. He served in the Hong Kong Civil Service and then became a valuable contributor to the journal The Hong Kong Naturalist. He later took a job at the British Museum where he served as assistant keeper of Oriental antiquities. So with him, this one is fun. So when we started with him, you can see that a lot of his mother's side was there and not so much on his father's side. And when we finished with him,
Wow.
we were able to fill in quite a lot on his father's side.
Yeah.
So he started pretty well connected. He had about 22,459 connections when we started. And then this may not look different, but it actually is a lot more condensed. He ended with 4,179 connections. So quite a lot for Mr. Roger there. I know they had a lot of fun working on his lines too. So is that what was worked on?
There were so many knobby families in this family. It was really low hanging fruit, and I'm ashamed to say I did hang around this tree. My favourite thing to find out was that Roger was actually a third cousin of Bamber Gascoigne.
Oh, cool.
Which I was really happy about, because he went through the Gascoignes and who were, sorry, husband's just arrived home. They went. He was in the Gascoigne family who were buried in Barking, and in Barking we have the Gascoigne estate, a really hideous council estate, and Bamber Gascoigne came and opened that for us back in the 1970s.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
And it was also interesting to see down again on the father's side that a lot of them were reverends. Buying sort of like buying and selling the right to present their sons to the church, as they did in those days.
Very cool.
That's interesting, because I think that's 3 out of the 7 people have got reference in there, which must be way beyond the expected numbers, mustn't it? So
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about this was also that it's further out than is shown on the finder, but they finally married into the Hooblums, he was the first governor of the Bank of England. So yeah.
Very cool. So just a couple of the interesting folks that we found. So Soame Gambier Jennings was Roger's great uncle. He was born April 14th, 1826, also in Bottisham, to George Jennings and Maria Jane Gambier. He served in the Crimean War. He was ranked as a brevet major, and he commanded. They were at war. They were in a battle, and 2 of his senior officers died. And so he stepped up and took command of the B Troop of the 13th Light Dragons during what was called the Charge of the Light Brigade. And so for that, he was awarded the Companion of the Bath, and he was described as a brave and very well-respected man who was deeply mourned when he died in 1873. So, quite brave. And that was Roger's great uncle. And then there is this guy, John Williamson. He was something else too, it sounds like. He was born about 1708 in England, and he was part of a group that on January 21st, 1743 founded the Honorable and Facetious Society of Ugly Faces. So their membership was about 40 men, mainly affluent merchants and professionals. Membership requirements included being a bachelor, having a facetious disposition, and of course having an ugly face. So I wish we had a photo of this guy. His appearance was described as rough face, bleary eyes flowing like two fountains, monstrous long nose hooked like an eagle's beak, and a pretty large mouth.
Oh dear.
I was really pleased when I found this guy.
Oh my gosh, he was so fun. He just was something. And so the other funny part with him, so one, he was the mayor of Liverpool in 1761. And there was a man named Richard Brooke who wrote about him and said that one of his daughters married General Gascoigne, who was for many years one of the representatives of Parliament for Liverpool. And another daughter married John Dent, who was, during several parliaments, a member for Lancaster. Both of the ladies were celebrated for their beauty.
Took after their mother then.
Yes, so he may have been a founding member of the Ugly Face Club, but his daughters were okay.
Oh dear. Yeah.
So he was fun. It's so much fun when you get like, a lot of times you can only find dates and places, but when you can get these little nuggets of who the person was, it's so fun.
Yeah.
According to that, he was born in 1708 and died in 1871, which would have made him...
that was a typo.
Born 1808.
1808, right, okay.
I think,
it says 1708 on here.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you type for too long.
Yeah.
So that was John. And John was Roger's fourth great-grandfather.
mm-hmm.
And then we had a lot of people in his CC7, so there were a lot of people that come and go from different places.
Yeah.
So they went all over the world, including a significant amount from South Africa and India, and a lot from Great Britain. So you'd have to go to WikiTree Plus and pull up this map for Jennings, Mr. Jennings, and you'd be able to zoom in a lot closer and see all the different, the states, and be able to really look more closely at those.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
I'll never get over that Ugly Face Club.
I know. That was my favorite thing from the whole week. So funny.
Given the Soames name, did you find any connection to the Churchill family that in the links? Because they're linked to the Soames family, aren't they? And Soames, the spelling is quite unusual, isn't it? So it's the same.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think there are.
It.
But because they'd already been created, I didn't spend much time.
No, I understand that.
But if you go onto his tree or his profile, then you can trace it back.
Yeah, of course. No, that will be good. Yeah. Okay. All right.
I'll check our relationship finder real quick.
Well, yeah.
Let's see.
I think Winston Churchill was often considered to have quite an ugly face as well, wasn't he? So,
so Winston and Roger are ninth cousins once removed.
So yes, in other words, that's
Yeah,
that's good. Excellent.
Yeah, they do connect back there. So.
All right. So yes, good. Brilliant.
Yeah, I think he was the posh one, because I remember when I was teasing people and they said, oh, it will be somebody that's posh. And I said, no, I don't think they're all posh. I think I have got a wide spectrum of people who did all sorts of different things and came from all sorts of different walks of life. But yeah, he was the posh one, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That's probably why you got so far with him. They had land and things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It does make a difference when they're not ag labs and
Yeah.
the like.
You have no idea how many ag labs I have in my own tree.
But of course, over generations, you get both upward and downward mobility, don't you? So that
yes.
Great
Did you delve into the Cambridge University records? Because there were so many vicars, and a lot of them will possibly have gone to Cambridge, and I wondered if you had used those records.
We used then a lot.
Yeah.
Cambridge alumni. Yeah.
So that's a good site, that is, isn't it?
And Crockford's would have been helpful to you as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
There's
also the Clergy of the Church of England database, which
that's
is
right. Yeah, so,
yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Oh.
So how do we do?
Yeah, I thought that was really good. I'm impressed with what you managed to do with it. With what I gave you.
Yeah, can we thank you and your colleagues? I mean, it was a fascinating piece of work, and really enjoyed sort of taking part this afternoon and getting a bit more sort of take on what you've actually done. So it was excellent. So thank you so much.
No, I'm glad you could join us, and I'm going to give a shout out to a few people that worked on it. Jamin Chaka was our MVP of the week. They get points for different things, and he was our top scorer. We also do bounty points for different things, like the first person who connects someone to the tree. We give them some brick walls to break down, so if they can break one of those, they get some points. So we had 2 bounty hunters that tied. We call them bounty hunters. They tied for points for that, and that was Marjorie Gibbons and Vicky Blanco. And then I have to give a shout out to Joan. Joan Whitaker was the captain for the week. She wanted to be here, but she had another meeting, and she just gave me a little bit to read. So I'm just going to read. This is from Joan. I'm sorry that I'm unable to be with you today for the reveal of the Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire Family History Society. I want to thank everyone who took part and helped to make the week such a success. I was impressed with the overall standard of the work that was done during the week, and particularly enjoyed the friendly collaboration that took place on Discord. I would also like to thank the Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire Family History Society for sending us such an interesting selection of profiles to work on. Some quite hard to find information about, but it was a great challenge for us, another improvement for our shared tree. So,
it's lovely.
Thank
you for inviting us.
Well, yeah. I mean, we have a regional group of family history societies, and there's a meeting in a couple of months' time. So I shall certainly, in my report, say something very positive about this, and I'm sure that will then sort of resonate through the other members, and it may well be that you'll get some further business through that.
That would be great.
Yeah, good.
We have a lot of fun doing these, so
yeah, it's good.
So thank you for partnering up and taking our challenge and giving us a challenge.
Wow,
You're welcome.
Yeah.
We'll be back next year if you'll have us.
So I know you had 5 more names, so we're definitely gonna have to figure out some way to.
Well, we'll pick some ag labs. So
let's make it really. This was just the warm up. We're going to make it really hard next time.
Yeah. So perhaps we'll take somebody really early. I mean, I'm quite interested in tracing ancestors back to the Conqueror, so we'll perhaps go for one of those as well.
Yeah, let's do that.
There we are.
we do have a group of members that really like working on those really early research.
I have a talk which is called "My Family Back to 1066," which
nice.
people how to do it, and so it's on our website if you're interested in seeing it. So
very cool.
Yeah. So
thank you.
Excellent.
All right. Well, then we will say farewell for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Yeah. Good.